I want to dedicate this today's shmuz to the Le'ilui Nishmas Reb Yosef Reb Avigdor Gelb, the father of Aaron Gelb, who learned with us the first 2 years of the yeshiva, and he was nifta this week. His Reb Yosef was a huge Talmud Chacham who spent all his life learning. He wrote several svarim. Reb Yosef Reb Avigdor Zichroni Levracha. Anyway, the pasuk says like this. It's interesting because the core of this talk is really something that we said in yeshiva the first year. Shoftim v'shoitrim titein l'cha b'chol she'arecha, asher Hashem Elokecha noisen l'chol shvatecha v'shoftu es ha'am mishpat tzedek. So shoftim are judges, as Rashi says, dayonim hapoiskim es hadin. Shoitrim are l'chayre law enforcement personnel. Rashi says, Haroidim es ha'am achar mitzvosam shemakin v'koifsin b'makel u'beritzua. They hit people, they coerce people, they force them. Achi yekabel olav din ha'shoifet, until the person is mekabel the din that the shoifet was paskin. So l'chayre, it's only through the shoftim that there's a v'shoftu es ha'am mishpat tzedek. The shoftim are the ones that judge the correct, a righteous judgment. The shoitrim are in no way involved in deciding the din. So it's kind of strange that the shoitrim are mentioned in the middle of this pasuk. It should have said shoftim titim chavish chol shorecha v'shoftu es ha'am mishpat tzedek. And then it should say about the shoitrim. But the pasuk actually says, Shoiftim v'shoitrim, titein l'cha b'chol she'arecha, asher Hashem Elokecha noisen l'chol shvatecha, v'shoftu es ha'am mishpat tzedek. It seems like the shoitrim are part of the v'shoftu es ha'am, which is not true. It's also surprising that all Moinei HaMitzvahs count the appointment of shoiftim and the appointment of shoitrim as one mitzvah in the minyan ha-mitzvahs. L'chayre, these are two totally separate and independent mitzvahs, to appoint shoiftim and to appoint shoitrim. Like the Brisa says in Sanhedrin Daf Tezayim at Beis, Minayin shema'amidim shoiftim li Yisrael, Talmud loymar shoiftim titei, shoitrim li Yisrael minayin, Talmud loymar shoitrim titein. So l'chayra, these are two separate mitzvahs. Why are they counted as one mitzvah? In the Sifri, in the beginning of this week's Parsha, it says, Im yesh shoitrim, yesh shoiftim. V'im ein shoitrim, ein shoiftim. If there are policemen, there are judges. If there are no policemen, there are no judges. In the Midrash Tanchuma, it says, a bit more ba'arichas, it says, Im ein shoiter, ein shoifet. Ketzat, kevon shenes chayiv odem bebezdin l'chaveroi. Bezdin paskin that you have to pay. Im ein shoiter sheyoitzi mimenu. If there's no shoiter that will take the money out of his hands, kivon sheperish min hadayin. As soon as he leaves bezdin, ein sipuk biyad hadayin laso yisloi klum. The dayin can't do anything about it. Elohim kein moiser biyad hashoiter al yidei elu ve'elu hamishpat nigmar. So the Lashon HaSifri that says im ein shoitrim ein shoiftim, it would sound like it's a halacha that if we can't appoint shoitrim, we don't even appoint shoiftim. In the Tanchuma, it could be that the Tanchuma is just describing the reality of life, that the shoifet will not be able to make sure that the din will be carried out if he doesn't have a shoiter along with him. It's not clear from the Tanchuma that this is a halacha. From the Sifri, it sounds like it's a din. Im ein shoitrim, ein shoiftim. The Orach Chaim HaKodesh struggles with this. He says that why should we say that if you can't find policemen, if you can't appoint policemen, you shouldn't have judges? He says, true, there will be some people that will not be Mekayim the din, but many people will be Mekayim the din. So Avada, we should have Shoftim, even if we can't enforce it. As long as they will paskin the Mishpat Tzedek, some people will obey. And therefore, the Orach Chaim HaKodesh says that it must be that even though the Sifri sounds like it's saying that if we don't have Shoitrim, we don't appoint Shoftim, it's not so. It just means that the Shoftim on their own can't accomplish what needs to be accomplished, and we also need to appoint Shoitrim. It's not like the Mashmos of the Sifri, it's more like it sounds in the Tanchuma. Rav Perlo, in his biur on the Sefer HaMitzvahs of Reb Sadia Gaon, does understand that the Sifri is for real, that if we don't have for some reason the ability to appoint policemen, we don't have the mitzvah to appoint judges. And he says that that explains why the Moinei HaMitzvahs count as one mitzvah, the mitzvah of Minui, Shoftim, and Shoitrim. He says that that's based on what the Rambam says in the Sefer HaMitzvahs in Shorish Yud Aleph, that if the Chelkei HaMitzvah are Ma'akvin Zeh Zeh, they're counted as one mitzvah. So he says that based on the Sifri, the Chelkei HaMitzvah are Ma'akvin Zeh Zeh. Without Shoitrim, there are no Shoftim. Without Shoftim, there are no Shoitrim. And therefore, it's one mitzvah. However, Avada, the ha'ara of the Orach Chaim HaKodesh is a ha'ara. I mean, why should it be so? Why did the Torah Mele, if there are no Shoftim, we don't have a need for Shoitrim. But if there are no Shoitrim, we shouldn't have Shoftim. Why shouldn't the Shoftim decide what the halacha is, even if I don't have Shoitrim to enforce it? Now, Rashi says that Shoftim are Dayonim HaPoiskim Es Hadin. The Gur Aryeh, the Maharal, says that this is something Rashi didn't need to explain. He said it's self-understood that that's what Shoftim means. He says that Rashi only explained Shoftim begrora of Shoitrim. In other words, since Shoitrim are those that are makin v'koifsin b'makeh l'ritzua achi yekabel all of din ha'shoifet, from this we know that the Shoftim, the role of the Shoftim is over when they paskin the halacha, and they are not in charge of enforcing the din. So he says that when Rashi says that Shoftim is dayonim apoiskim esadin, Rashi is saying Shoftim are dayonim that only paskin the din, and they're not responsible personally for making sure that the din is carried out. And that we know from the fact that the Torah says ve shoitrim. So we know that the shoitrim are those that enforce the din. Memela, we know that shoftim means dayonim hapoiskim esadin only. But the truth is that shoitrim l'chayra also Rashi didn't need to explain. And that's because in Parshas Dvorim, in Kapitel Aleph, Pasuk Tesvav, it says, V'ekach es roshei shivteichem, v'goymer, v'shoitrim l'shivteichem. Rashi says, v'shoitrim manisi aleichem l'shivteichem, elu ha'koifsin v'hamakin b'ritzua al pi hadayonim. So we already know from Parshas Dvorim that shoitrim are the policemen that enforce the din, koifsin v'makin b'ritzuim b'ritzu al pi hadayonim. So it comes out that this entire Rashi is unnecessary. We know shoitrim from Parshas Dvarim, and shoftim is understood from the shoitrim, that if the shoitrim means the makin v'koifsin, so it must be that the shoftim, all they need to do is paskin the din. No, it would be a talking, according to the Sifsei Chachamim, who says that Rashi is coming, when Rashi explains the shoitrim, he's coming la'afuke, that you shouldn't learn that these shoitrim are the same shoitrim that are mentioned further on in this week's Parsha. Further on in this week's Parsha, by the Mulchama, it says, V'dibru ha-shoitrim el ha'om leimor, mihohish, etc. So you see that those that were memuneh on the Mulchama are also referred to as shoitrim. And that's why Rashi over here says shoitrim are the makin v'koifsin, that they're not the Shoitrim further on in the Parsha. And so also you see in the Targum Onkelos, further on in the Parshas HaMelchama, he says that Shoitrim are Sarchayo, and over here he says that it's Puronin. Boyfriend, that even though Rashi already said in Parshas Dvar that the Shoitrim are the Makin v'Koifsin al Pi Hadayon, he needed to explain again what the Shoitrim are, because we shouldn't think it's the Shoitrim of further on in the Parsha. And Memele, like the Gurariye says, he explained that the Shoftim, all they do is Poiskin Esadin. But Lefizeh comes out that Rashi is really teaching Shoitrim in our Parsha the same as he taught the Shoitrim in Parshas Dvar. The reason that he repeated the Pirush is Lafuke, that you shouldn't learn that these Shoitrim are the Shoitrim are further on in the Parsha. So it's interesting that Rashi over here is more marich in explaining what the Shoitrim are than the first time in Parshas Dvar. In Parshas Dvar, he says, Elu hakoifsin v'hamakin beritzua al pi hadayon. But over here, he gets into a whole long talk. He says, Haroidin esa'am achar mitzvasam. Shemakin v'koifsin beritzua u'b'makel achi yekabel olav din ha'shoifet. So if there's a need for this arichas, he should have done it in Parshas Dvar. Why is it that in Parshas Dvarim Rashi says it more bekitzer? He says, Elu hakoifsin v'hamakin beritzua al pi hadayon. And over here, he goes into this whole arichas that Haroidin esa'am achar mitzvasam. So it could be that the Rashi over here and the Rashi in Parshas Dvarim are really saying two different things. How's that possible? Because, in Parshas Dvarim, Rashi says, Elu hakoifsin umakim beritzua al pi hadayon. Al pi hadayonim. It's mashma that the dayonim tell them to hit. When the Dayanim paskin a halacha and they say that Reuven has to pay Shimon $100, they don't tell the Shoitrim to hit. If Reuven doesn't pay Shimon the $100, the Shoitrim get involved. What's the Al Pi Dayanim? It could be that the Al Pi Dayanim means the chiyuv of giving malchus. If somebody becomes mechuyev malchus and bezdin, so then there are the Shoitrim, which the Mishnah calls the chazonim of the Bezdin, the Mishnah in Makis, that give the Malchus. So they are the Shoitrim of Parshas Dvarim that are Makin v'Koifsin al Pi Hadayon. Now, over here in our Parsha, Rashi changes his language and he says, Haroidin esa'om achar mitzvason, achi yikabel olav din ha'shoifet. Over here, we're not talking about Makis that are al pi hadayon. It's not that the Makis, the Bezdin told the Shoitrim to hit. Over here, we're talking about Shoitrim that get involved when somebody doesn't want to be Mekayim the din of the Shoifet. And then they force him. And it's Bemis Meduyik, because Rashi in Parshas Dvarim only talks about a Ritzua and not about a Makil. If he's talking about the Chiyuv Malchus, the Chiyuv Malchus is with a Ritzua Shel Egel, as the Mishnah says in Makis. Whereas in our Parsha that we're talking about forcing somebody to be Mekayim the din, Rashi says Makil or Ritzua. And another thing that Rashi in Parshas Dvarim says Koifsin u'makin. And over here he says Makin v'Koifsin. Koifsin u'makin is appropriate in the context of the Chiyuv Malchus, where they tied the guy down and then they gave him the Malchus. Whereas Makin v'Koifsin is appropriate in the context of forcing somebody to be Mekayim the din. The first thing is we give him some Malchus. If it doesn't work, we put him in jail. So the pshat is it's Makin v'Koifsin. And over there it's Koifsin u'makin. But even that, according to Rashi, there are three types of Shoitrim. There are the Shoitrim of Parshas Dvarim, which is the Chazan HaKnesses that gives the Malchus. There's the Shoitrim of our Parsha, of the beginning of the Parsha, Shoftim v'Shoitrim, which are the Shoitrim that do the job of forcing people to be Mekayim the Din HaShoifet. And they're the Shoitrim that talk to the that the shoitrim that are involved in the mihoish, asher, bonabayis, etc. in Hilchis Mulcham. Now, the fact that Rashi didn't learn over here, that it wasn't mefarish over here, the shoitrim like in the Parshas Mulcham, that's pashut, because those shoitrim have nothing to do with the shoftim. And there's no reason for the Torah to mention those shoitrim in the context of shoftim. But we still need to understand, how does Rashi know that these shoitrim are not the shoitrim of Parshas Dvarim? So it could be that the shoitrim of Parshas Dvarim, since they do it al pi hadayonim, so they don't need to be mentioned as an independent appointment. It's be'emes b'chlal the mitzvah of the shoftim. The shoftim have to be shoftim, and this al pi hadayonim, the Chazan HaKnesses gives the malchus. Shoitrim as an independent entity is only the shoitrim that are involved in forcing the nidoin to be mekayim, the din of the bezdin, and therefore the shoftim over here that are mentioned independently are shoitrim that are not the Chazan HaKnesses, but the shoitrim that enforce what bezdin paskin. And there's a nafkamina ladina from this that it's mavur in the Sefri, according to the way Rav Perlo understands, that the shoftim v'shoitrim are ma'akiv zeh, that's only true as far as the shoitrim who enforce the mishpat of the shoftim. If you don't have such shoitrim, there's no mitzvah to appoint shoftim. However, if Bezdin doesn't have anybody to give malchus, they don't close the Bezdin. I mean, they paskin that he's mechoyev malchus when we'll have somebody to give the malchus, so he will get the malchus. But there's no reason to close the Bezdin. Whereas if you don't have shoitrim to enforce, the psak, then there's no Bezdin b'chlal. But we still don't understand why is that. I mean, why, like the Orach Chaim is, you can't force people to be mekayim the din. But paskin the din, maybe they will be mekayim the din. Yeah, so Ken Zayin Azoy, that a bezdin that can't enforce the din that they paskin. So the fact that they'll paskin and it won't become mekuyim, it really degrades the bezdin. It undermines the status of the bezdin. And Memela, we don't want to have a bezdin if the bezdin can't enforce the dinim that they paskin, we rather not paskin the dinim b'chlal, because having a situation where bezdin says A and life goes on and the din of the bezdin is not mekuyim, that undermines the status of the bezdin, and we rather not have a bezdin than have a bezdin with an undermined status. And it could be even more. When the shoftim don't have the ability to force the Balei Din to be Mekayim the Din, we're afraid that they won't have the courage to make unpopular decisions. If they don't have the tools to bring about the kiyum of the Din, they won't paskin the Din correctly. They need to have the tools to enforce the halacha in order that they should paskin the richtige halacha, and therefore we say that an ein shoitrim, ein shoftim. We rather not have the shoftim at all, because consciously or subconsciously, if they can't influence the people, they are influenced by the people. They're afraid to say what needs to be said, and their sack will be slanted. And therefore, we rather not have shoftim than have shoftim without shoitrim. Now, that's why it says, shoftim v'shoitrim titem l'cha b'chol shorecha v'shoftu es amish b'tzedek. We asked, the shoitrim are not involved in deciding the din. True, they're not involved. But in order for the shoftim to be v'shoftu es amish b'tzedek, there have to be also shoitrim that could enforce the din. Because if they don't have shoitrim that could enforce the din, then they won't be v'shoftu es amish b'tzedek, because they'll be afraid of the Gvar Alam, and they won't go against what's more popular, and therefore it won't be a mishpat tzedek. So we need the shoitrim in order to ensure that the shoftim of a shoftim is a mishpat tzedek, and therefore it's one mitzvah, and therefore it's ma'akev zeh, and therefore we say that the v'shoftim is a mishpat tzedek is dependent on the shoitrim. Now, what this means in our personal avodas Hashem, it's yadua that the Shachar HaTorah and the Shloach Kodesh and others say that the word l'cho is miyuter. It could have said shoftim v'shoitrim titein b'chol shorecha. What does it mean l'cho? So they say that l'cho is a remez that every person has to appoint shoftim for himself. They say shorecha is all the gateways between myself and the outside world, my eyes, my mouth, my ears. I have those sha'arim between me and the outside world, and one has to have shoftim that decide, should I look, should I not look, should I hear, should I not hear, should I say, should I not say? In other words, there have to be in the sha'arim of every lecha, there has to be shoftim. But according to what we're saying, it's not enough to have shoftim. There's also a need for shoitrim. In other words, it's not enough that I know what's right and wrong. I have to also develop an emotional connection with Yiddishkeit. I have to develop a passion for Torah mitzvahs. And I have to acquire skills of self-regulation and self-discipline. Because if I don't, not only will I not live by my convictions, but I actually will see things the wrong way, because I'll be biased to see things the wrong way, because a person doesn't want to live with steers, with contradictions. And therefore, just like the Bezdin, if they don't have shoitrim, we're afraid that they won't paskin a mishpat tzedek, because if the people are not afraid of the Bezdin is afraid of the people. So also, if I'm not afraid of myself is afraid of me. In other words, I think in a slanted way, because if I can't carry out what I believe in, I will start believing that in what I do. If I can't do what I believe, I'll believe what I do. And therefore, just like as far as the shoftim v'shoitrim in the simple meaning, im ein shoitrim ein shoftim, so also in the shoftim v'shoitrim titen lecha, there has to be not only shoftim, but also shoitrim. And that's really what the Balei Musar were busy with. It's not just about knowing what's right and what's wrong, but it's about learning Musar, getting excited about doing what's right, getting excited about not doing what's wrong. Like Rabbi Shol Salanta said, you should learn Musar b'sfasayim dolkois, with burning lips. He said, and repeat lines over and over again in order to make it part of who we are. And Rabbi Shol Salanta writes in his Igeres HaMusar, he writes, Ha'odam chafshi b'dimyoinoi v'asur b'muskoloi. A first person is free in his imagination, but he's bound, he's tied up in his seichel. His seichel tells him that there are limits, there are boundaries. Dimyoinoi moilichoi shoivev b'derech leiv ritzoinoi, etc. Oila dimyoin, oyev hara halazeh. The dimyon is my enemy. Miodeinu, we create it, b'koichenu la'archikoi. We could push it away. How? Besitenu oizen kasheves el haseichel. If we lend a listening ear to our seichel, we will get rid of the dimyon. V'chulei. And then he says, Uma nase, but what shall we do? Hadimyon nachal shoitev. The dimyon is like a overflowing river. V'aseichel yitova. And the seichel will drown. If we won't take it in a boat, he rikshas hanefesh v'saras haruach. That's the rikshas hanefesh v'saras haruach. I don't know how to translate that, but Yeshua Yor, I'm sure, could do a good job at that. But the thing is, what he's saying is that if we don't put our seichel in the oniyah, which is rikshas hanefesh and saras haruach, the seichel will be yitava. In other words, we understand what's right. He's saying, but the dimyan is a nachal shoitiv. And since the dimyan is a nachal shoitiv, so without preserving the seichel in an aniyah, which is rikshas and nefesh v'saras haruach, the seichel will drown in the nachal shoitiv of the dimyan, which is mamish them ein shoitrim, ein shoftim. Without the ability to enforce what you believe in, you will stop believing in what you need to believe in. It's Yadua, the Even HaOzel, in the end of Hilchis Me'ila, writes, V'shamati b'shem go'in echod, she'amar lo echod me'achofshim, yesh li kushis. A person that wasn't Shomer Torah mitzvah said to him that I have kashis. Amar lo yagoin, im hoya lecha kushis, if you would have kashis on emunah, hoya efshili yashiv lecha kushis secha. I mean, that's my job. I mean, I give tirutzim on kashis. Hachisoren hu shehem etzlecha loy kushis elo tirutzim. By you, it's not a kasha, it's really a teretz. Ein cho roitze lishmor dinei ha-Torah, v'ata roitze l'taretz atzmucha lo mo'in choshoim, v'lechein ata mamtzi la'atzmucha tirutzim. V'omer hagoyin shezeu ma sheshonu chachomim, v'agodah shel Pesach, roshem mahu oimer. She'oimer bala agodah, v'lefi shehoitzi atzmui min haklal, kofer be'ikr. Chayre koydem hu kofer be'ikr, v'ach kach moitzi atzmui min haklal. Hello. Shebe'emes einoi king. The sibas ma shekoifer hu b'shul shiroitz lo yitzi atzmui min haklal v'li potem medinei ha-Torah. V'zoi ha-siba shekoifer be'ikr. In any case, he said, I can't give tirutzim to tirutzim. I could give tirutzim on kashas. But these kashas are not really kashas. These kashas are really tirutzim. Which tirutzim? I mean, why does a person make tirutzim? Because a person doesn't want to live with steers. So he rationalizes and he makes sense out of his wrong decisions. And that's the im ein shoitrim, ein shoftim. We say, LeDavid Hashem oiri v'yishi mimi ira. You know, the oir is meir the einei haseichel. In darkness, you can't see the difference between this and that and the other thing. Yeah, you need light in order that you should be Mishiyakir, ben tchelis lelavon, ben tchelis lekarsi. So oiri is to see what's right and wrong. But that's not enough. You also need the yishi. The yishi is the help to be able to be mizgaber on all the barriers, on all the ma'akvim, from carrying out the hachro of the einei haseichel. That's the shoitrim. And only then is it mimi ira. The chinuch, it's interesting, the chinuch in mitzvah Tov Tzadik Aleph, when he defines the mitzvah of shoftim v'shoitrim, and it's not in the Mishor Shia mitzvah, it's in the Ika Agdor of the mitzvah, he says, why do we need shoftim v'shoitrim? He says, Lamanois shoftim v'shoitrim she'achrichu la'asais mitzvahs haTorah. V'yachziru hanoitim miderech ha'emes eleha bal korcham. Yeah, you should force people to do the mitzvahs and stay away from averis. Koifin ala mitzvahs. He says, "V'yitzavu b'ro'ui la'asos." They should be mitzaveh on what's ro'ui to do. V'yimnu advarim ha'megunim. V'yikaimu hagdorim al ha'over. And now he says a line. I think is a fascinating line. Ad shelo yiyu mitzvahs haTorah u'mini oiseha tzrichos la'emunas ish ve'ish. We can't allow that Torah should be dependent, that holding back from averis and doing mitzvahs should be dependent on emunas ish ve'ish. And that's why you have to have shoftim v'shoitrim that make it happen whether you do believe or you don't believe. I say the same thing as with the shoftim v'shoitrim titein l'cho. A person has to have the ability to discipline himself to the extent that he doesn't really, it's not dependent on my emunah every single day. In other words, avada, you can't say that a person could reach this without emunah any day. But our daily behavior can't be dependent on daily inspiration or daily conviction. It has to be that we apply methods of self-discipline that when we have that moment of truth, we take on Gdorim. We take on Gdorim So it shouldn't be totally be'emunas ish v'ish, that our ongoing behavior is dependent on the emunah that we had at that good moment, and that will carry us through. Okay, Rabbi Say, having said that, I think I will wish you a good Elulin. And we should be zoiche to ksiva v'chsima toiva. I mean, every day is part of bringing ourselves to be zoiche, because you see that Elul is anila doidi v'doidi li, as the Abudraham says. Now, you know that the v'doidi li is really in from Rosh Hashanah till Yom Kippur. The anila doidi, the sarusa de lasata, the awakening from beneath, that's what happens during Elul. But the v'doidi li is also included in the Rashi Tevis of Elul, because the extent of the v'doidi li is dependent on the avodah and the hachoneh of Chodesh Elul. Okay, Rabbi.